At dawn, an honor guard from the People's Liberation Army performs this ceremony in Tiananmen Square. It happens every single morning, even this week when the whole world is descending on Beijing for the Olympic Games. Raising the flag here is one of the few things about China that hasn't changed since the days of Chairman Mao. China, a nation which has become so important to so many, yet which remains understood by so few, is in the process of transforming itself. And in doing so, is transforming the world.
An example is...
Tonight, I report on China from 4 continents. China is so big and growing so fast that its global impact can only be understood from the inside out. Good evening, I'm Bob Woodruff. The last time I stood here was in 1989 during the student uprisings. It was when my career as a journalist began. I'd come to China to teach law to Chinese students, but what was happening here was remarkable, frightening, and too important to ignore. Change was coming and no one knew where it was all going to lead. Now, 19 years later, China is changing faster than any country on the planet.
The rise of China is the single most important geopolitical event in the 21st century. And the implications of the rise are enormous.
China has gone global. And unlike the United States, the Chinese are not distracted by wars half a world away or growing resentment of their expanding influence. Do you think that a rising China is a threat to the United States?
Definitely not. Why we should be the threat? In what terms?
The only countries that China will not make deals with are those that support total independence for Taiwan, which few countries, including the United States, do anymore.
China isn't going to go away. It is back on the world stage in a way it hasn't been for a very long time, and it's something we absolutely need to understand.
Over the last 25 years, China has lifted more people out of poverty than any society in history. So if you're the government today, you feel this incredible pressure to keep that economic engine going.
The Chinese are expanding their influence around the world for one reason: to make it possible for more and more of their people to live like we do. At first, they are hard to spot. Then, they are impossible to miss. The Chinese have come to Angola in force, and the country is being transformed. In country after country around the world, the story is the same. What China is doing, and America is not. Angola does have an important American connection, a connection that goes back to the African slave trade. When this was a Portuguese colony, more slaves were sent to America from Angola than from any other region in Africa. Today in Angola, the Chinese that I studied years ago became very useful. 你好，我可以看那个吗？有很多的人在这儿吗？这10个人吗？ Just 4 years ago, there were barely 200 Chinese citizens in Angola. Today, there are over 22,000 living and working here. 你们你好，你好，你们知道工作吗？现在？对，工作。在这儿你住？在这住。啊 ，OK。几个人？里面有多？你去哪儿？在工地。啊，在工地。再见啊。 Chinese workers are just the most visible evidence of the growing ties between China and Angola. How much money has China loaned to Angola?
The bank has already signed 2 agreements. The first one we already finished with $2 billion. The second one is also $2 billion, so $4 billion altogether.
The Chinese money will have a very positive impact
in the overall development of the Angolan economy. This is a huge country with huge needs. We are very proud of this cooperation, which is benefiting equally Angola and China.
What is China getting in return for these loans?
Angola will repay us with oil.
Lots of oil. Angola is one of the fastest growing oil producers in the world. China is receiving 10,000 barrels of Angolan oil a day to pay off the loans. And months after the loans were finalized, a state-owned Chinese oil company also was granted direct access to Angola's offshore oil for the first time. But Chevron and other major Western oil companies, Exxon, Total, BP, still dominate oil production. Since American oil companies started pumping oil out of Angola 40 years ago, nothing has stopped the flow of oil to the West. Even during a long and bloody civil war in the wake of independence from Portugal, the oil kept flowing. It was a deadly sideshow of the Cold War. The Marxist government forces were backed by the Soviet Union, and the United States and South Africa gave weapons and support to the rebels. During the 27 years the fight dragged on, oil production in Angola increased by nearly 500%. Billions of dollars of oil money bankrolled the war, and billions more just disappeared. By the time the shooting stopped in 2002, more than 1 million Angolans were dead.
By the end of the Civil War, Angola was just an absolute disaster. Large parts of the countryside were devastated. The capital, Angola, had millions of refugees. And from the Angolan point of view, they felt the country was on its knees, and now was the time for the great sort of Western financial institutions to come to their aid.
When we approached the international community stating our needs, the response was timid. The response was not straightforward. The response to us was very rigid.
In other words, Western governments, led by the United States and Britain, would only offer Angola money to rebuild the country if the Angolan government agreed to all kinds of conditions, including conditions designed to minimize corruption. The Chinese made a better offer, $2 billion, very few conditions. The Chinese and Angolans agreed that the money has to be spent on infrastructure and development projects, and 70% of those projects are contracted to Chinese-owned companies that are doing the work. Angolans don't have the capacity yet to do so much work so quickly. 你好，我有一个问题。7天每个星期你工作？
就是7天，每天都是工作7天。一个星期都是7天。
很多的工作啊。
很紧啊。
All over Angola, Chinese companies are building new roads, laying down new railways, raising new office buildings, hospitals, schools. Nearly 2/3 of the country still doesn't have access to clean water or basic sanitation. This drainage project in Luanda, Angola's capital, will make a huge difference. 你爱这个安哥拉的人吗？
很好的，
也不错的人，对吗？谢谢，谢谢，再见啊。What you said is China's spreading prosperity in Africa where the West failed.
I think the question should be this. Many Western countries have been in Africa for centuries. But little thing has been done for the infrastructure development, economic development. It is really the failure, I would say, the Western countries.
Do you think that your technique, the Chinese way, has just worked a lot better?
I certainly think so, because we have less interference into their internal affairs. It's not people like us as outsiders. We can say what is good for them. It's the people to decide what is good for them.
But the Chinese policy of letting the people decide usually really means letting the powerful decide. This beach club, owned by the Angolan president's daughter, is where the elite in Luanda come to relax. Almost all of the wealth here is controlled by a few very rich people. Angola has been well known as one of the most corrupt countries in Africa. And if things have improved slightly recently, it is not because the Chinese government is forcing the change. In fact, many private Chinese companies also have contracts here totaling billions of dollars. But there's no way to know how they operate. Despite the growing wealth of the country, most Angolans still live on less than $2 a day. All over Africa, Chinese leaders have been shaking hands and making deals, playing by their own rules in countries where the United States does not or will not do the same things. From Sudan, where the Chinese have been widely criticized for their oil and arms deals, to the troubled nation of Zimbabwe, to Nigeria, to Namibia, to Mozambique. China has established meaningful economic relationships with 48 of 53 countries in Africa. If Angola is the model for a new world map with China at the center, it is working.
The truth is that Angola is being rebuilt at an astonishing speed by Chinese companies who are working incredibly hard. The Western companies have been involved in Angola over the years, but they've done very, very little with building up Angola. And you go to Angola now, and the last 3 years, the country has been transformed, and that's in large part due to Beijing.
Is China buying political influence in Angola?
You know, probably that's the way of American thinking, you know, to buy the influence. I don't think that's our intention. But you cannot deny, when you are there, you have the influence there as well.
Last month, the Chinese government bank signed 3 new agreements to lend even more money to Angola. The soaring price of food is becoming a world crisis that affects us all. The price of soybeans, critical to the world food supply, has doubled in just the last 15 months, one unintended consequence of China's economic miracle. Here in Brazil, more and more soy is grown every year, and more of it gets shipped halfway around the world. At the Santos port on Brazil's east coast, another ship is loaded with soybeans, tens of thousands of tons headed to China. Until 1995, China didn't need to import any soybeans. Last year, China imported 34 million tons, accounting for nearly half of the global trade in soybeans. It is one measure of China's profound transformation.
Overnight, a Chinese peasant becomes a super consumer when they move into the cities. He starts to consume more electricity. He starts to drink more water. He starts to use a shower instead of a bucket. He starts to consume meat, which in fact uses vastly more material than if he was eating a rice and grain diet.
We've never had such a large number of people moving up the food chain so fast as they are in China today. China's 1.3 billion people. I mean, it's difficult for us to imagine. There are 300 million people in the United States, so that's 0.3 billion plus another billion. The demand for livestock products is just going up so rapidly, they need enormous amounts of soybeans to mix with the grain that they feed to livestock.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week, soybeans are processed at this plant in Nantong.
With this plant, currently we are running 2,000 tons a day. It's totally based on the market. So we are constantly trying to receive the beans, and move out to finish the product.
The faster the better.
Faster the better.
Every year you're going to make this faster?
That's right. And our customers still asking more and more.
There was a time when China would not import the food to feed the people. That was certainly Mao Zedong's way. That has changed?
We are improving our standard of living. It means we need more. But in our case, 1.32 billion, we need to feed every day. 3 meals every day. It's not easy.
China is home to 20% of humanity, but contains only 10% of the farmland on the planet. More and more of that land is unusable every year.
The industrialization that is raising incomes in such an unprecedented fashion is also chewing up farmland. I mean, you see bulldozers in rice paddies and wheat fields all over China, clearing land, moving land around, getting ready to build factories or new apartment buildings or roads.
With all of these new buildings being built, is it essentially no more room to grow a lot of this food?
Well, they're losing both cropland and irrigation water to industrialization and urbanization.
China's development is beyond the expectations of every Chinese. But of course, you also see many challenges. For instance, there is a certain degree of damage to the environment. So for the leadership, they know that you have to address these problems before it's too late.
That challenge for China is an opportunity for Brazil, the only country in the world that may be able to satisfy China's growing demand for soy. The United States currently exports more soy than any other country, but not for long, as U.S. farmers convert their soy crops to corn crops for biofuels. By the end of this year, Brazil will be the global leader in soy exports. Much of that soy is grown here in the state of Mato Grosso, just south of the Amazon rainforest. But this part of the country, this is relatively new for growing soybeans. Urai Maji is one of the largest soy producers in the world. So how many acres are we looking at of soybeans that you've got?
Nesta região do Centro-Oeste, que tem as maiores áreas do país e do mundo.
How much capacity do you have to grow soybeans?
Temos capacidade para aumentar mais 50%, podemos dobrar. Tem melhorado os preços nos últimos anos agora, nos últimos meses.
China is the main driver behind this increase in demand, and it's changing the business everywhere. It changes the economy, it has effects, it has a multiple effect on the other suppliers, tractors, fertilizers, creating more jobs. There's more money flowing into Brazil.
It's changing the country.
Changing the country.
Brazilians are enjoying the country's new wealth. Exports to China have helped to create the largest agricultural trade surplus in the world. China bought nearly $3 billion of Brazilian soy last year alone. Brazil is so successful that it is being called an agricultural superpower. But other things are changing too. Here in the Amazon, just north of the biggest soy farms. The Amazon rainforest is 1.1 billion acres, nearly half of all the rainforest on Earth. 1 in 10 known species live in the Amazon. Scientists say it's critical to regulating global climate, but it is increasingly vulnerable. Deforestation in the Amazon has spiked dramatically since last fall. And according to a recent study funded by NASA, increased deforestation of the Amazon has been directly linked to the rising price of soy. The Brazilian government says there is nothing to worry about.
I know you've said that, quote, the Amazon is not for sale.
Yes, I did.
Is there any possibility that more land is committed towards exporting to China, that there could be a movement into Amazon?
No, I don't think so. We know that we have much more to gain in terms of biodiversity, and we agree to discuss and to have measurable objectives in terms of reduction of deforestation, and that's what the government is working for and will continue to work for.
Should China bear some of the responsibility for the destruction of the Amazon?
I think that's totally, it's our responsibility, and we'll face it, and we'll deal with that.
Earlier this year, the Brazilian government announced plans to confiscate all crops grown on illegally deforested land and sent hundreds of Brazilian agents and police into the Amazon to try to slow the destruction.
The foreign minister said to us in Brazil, the Amazon is Brazil's responsibility and they will take care of it.
That's like saying climate change is the U.S. responsibility because we're the largest carbon emitter, and so we will take care of it. The Brazilian government does have the primary responsibility for taking care of the Amazon, but they also feel the pressure of developing at the same time. So we've got some enormous challenges in the world, and looking at soybeans is just one manifestation of a far larger complex of issues that deal with water and food and climate and population and land resources.
The fact is, China is not doing anything differently than we did when we became a rich country. The difference is that China has so many more people. It's doing it on such a larger scale, and it's doing it faster. If China decided to consume at the level that we consume in the United States, we would need another planet to be able to sustain them. And all of this is very much new territory. So we don't know if it's possible to give them enough resources. We don't know if it's possible for China to be able to sustain itself like this.
China's land scarcity is becoming everyone's land scarcity. Their water shortages are our water shortages. Their rising food prices are our rising food prices. We're in this together.
All over Asia, there's a struggle to embrace the 21st century without rejecting the past. These are the ancient temples of Angkor in Cambodia. The past hangs heavy over this country. Both China and the United States have a bitter history here. Today, Cambodia is recovering slowly. Poverty, disease, and massive corruption undermine economic progress. The Chinese see opportunity here.
Chinese have opened one factory every month in Cambodia since 2 years.
For 2 years every month?
Yes.
China has created another...
One factory in Cambodia.
Cambodia holds economic and strategic value for China. Economically, Cambodia is very, very inexpensive. Chinese businessmen can set up a factory that is cheaper to maintain and operate than it would have been in China. Strategically, Cambodia is also important because it represents a major piece of Southeast Asia. China wants to quietly establish a greater foothold over the region. It feels that it's its destiny to do so. So it can go to a country like Cambodia that is eager for international alliances, eager for cash, and it's willing to build those kinds of relationships.
Chinese is becoming the common language of trade and commerce in Cambodia. It's not the case that, for example, Microsoft and Boeing are looking to invest in Phnom Penh. China is seen as really being, at least economically, the opportunity of the future.
In Cambodia, there's really not much natural resources, not much oil, there's not much food that China needs. What is your growing relationship with Cambodia then?
I think that, first of all, that for China and Cambodia, we had a traditional good relations for many years. And I think you have to put the relations within the framework of trying to build up a peaceful neighborly environment for China. So that's why China feels that if China wishes to achieve its modernization, its economic and social development, you must make sure that your neighbors also develop.
Today, China has become the biggest foreign investor in Cambodia and has also provided hundreds of millions of dollars in aid and unconditional loans.
There is a perception among a lot of Southeast Asian leaders that the United States has pulled back from the region in the last few years. It has become preoccupied with things like Iraq, North Korea, and it's stopped paying as much attention to what happens in this part of the world. For Cambodia, ultimately it feels that it lives in a Chinese world. You cannot be in Southeast Asia today and not play with the Chinese and not make deals with them.
What is significant is the complete transformation of China's relations with Cambodia. One has to understand China's role in Cambodia in the 1970s. China was perhaps the most important supporter of the Khmer Rouge.
The Khmer Rouge seized power in Cambodia in the spring of 1975. The genocidal rule of the Khmer Rouge was a disastrous after-effect of the ways the United States and Vietnam had expanded their war into Cambodia.
The Khmer Rouge drove people out of cities and into agriculture camps. You had people being executed for suspected political disloyalty. You had children being forced to participate in killing their parents. You had every kind of human rights abuse under the sun.
Like the Nazis in Germany, the Khmer Rouge wanted a pure Cambodia, free from outsiders, especially their newly empowered neighbor, the Vietnamese. China supported the Khmer Rouge because China also worried about expanding Vietnamese influence in Southeast Asia.
There were bank accounts set up, there were pipelines of cash. And equally important, the Chinese provided the Khmer Rouge with just about every type of military assistance they wanted, short of sending Chinese troops.
In 1979, the Vietnamese forcibly removed the Khmer Rouge from power. By that time, nearly 2 million Cambodians had died.
Right now there's friendship between China and Cambodia, but it wasn't very long ago that China supported the Khmer Rouge, a brutal genocidal regime.
Certainly, I think we have our opinion about the policy of the Khmer Rouge, but I hope that this is now something of the past.
Should China bear some of the blame for that genocide?
I don't think so, because I think it's the policy of the Khmer Rouge, it's their own responsibility. Whatever they did in this period, it's not the responsibility or fault of China.
I am a survivor of the whole family. I'm not talking about theory. I'm the only survivor. I have no father, no mother. My forefather, brothers died. So I am talking about real life. I would never understand this. You have to know that yes, the Chinese were behind, were supporting the Khmer Rouge. But since that time, Cambodians and Cambodian government start to write a new page of our history, and now we do enjoy close relationship with China.
There are certainly people who feel that the current relationship with China is sort of a grotesque whitewashing of the past and essentially an effort by the Chinese government to make up now financially for its transgressions in the past. You know, there are other people who feel that it's a perfectly normal diplomatic relationship to have and that China's sins are no worse than the United States' bombing of Cambodia, which contributed measurably to the Khmer Rouge being able to come to power. This is a population that has every right in the world to claim, you know, being pretty weary of politics and to want to focus instead on improving the basic material conditions of their families.
This is where you can hear the sounds of Cambodia's future. Every morning in Phnom Penh, 8,000 students come to the Tuan Pha language school to learn Chinese. It is the largest Chinese language school outside of mainland China.
So now you're studying Chinese?
Yes.
Are there many that speak English here?
No. I'm the best in English.
You're the best one in English?
So you speak English? Hi, my name is Bob. So have you been studying Chinese here for how long?
About 3 years.
3 years?
Yeah.
Are there a lot of people now in this country studying Chinese?
Yes, because Chinese is such an important language.
It's more important now than before?
Yeah.
下面，哎，这叫上中下简。
Chinese language is your ticket to the future, ticket to prosperity. And that is what driving this absolute mass movement towards Chinese language schools.
China is such a big country and its economy also increased and very improved.
So you think you need to speak Chinese to get better jobs now?
Yeah.
Now you speak at least 3 languages perfectly. Is it fun?
Yeah, it's cool.
It's what?
It's cool.
It's cool?
Yeah.
For more than 200 years, during the entire existence of the United States, China has almost never been a dominant global power. That is now changing. President Bush and Chinese President Hu have met 6 times in the last 3 years because the United States and China have to get along. That is one reason President Bush left on Monday to attend the opening ceremonies of the Olympics in Beijing, despite pleas from human rights activists that he stay away.
In China, we always regarded our relations with the United States is the most important bilateral relations in the world.
Why is it the most important?
Because the United States is the most powerful country in the world, and they are being regarded by many as the only superpower in the world. And for China, we are the largest country in the world, and we also regard ourselves as the biggest developing country in the world. We want to regard the United States as our partners in maintaining world peace and in promoting world economic development.
When it comes to economics, the United States and China need each other. China's growth is the most remarkable economic event since the United States economy outpaced Britain at the end of the 19th century. And China shows few signs of slowing down. That is because the United States and the rest of the world are buying what China produces. In 2007, China's income from exports was $1.2 trillion.
China decided that it was going to export its way out of poverty, that it was going to make goods cheaply and then sell them in the developed world. Consider this, China today exports in one day as much as it exported in 1978, in that entire year. China is today the workshop of the world, and the scale, because of the size of China, is just unimaginable.
The only way that China is able to do what it can do is because it has the resources. When you've got 1.3 billion people, that means there's always somebody who's willing to work for the wage, whatever it is that you're willing to offer. And that means people can work around the clock. And they literally do work around the clock. The Chinese have this capacity to work and to accept hardship in a way that a lot of us can't. And I think that is an absolutely fundamental piece of what's happened over the last 25 years here.
China's economic revolution is doing what Mao's communist revolution never could, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty. China is creating 1 million new jobs a month, many in factories producing products for export. Americans can't seem to get enough of what China produces. The numbers get bigger every year. $320 billion of Chinese products were sold here last year alone. Tens of billions of dollars of clothing, computer parts, video equipment, sporting goods, furniture. Even $13 billion of Chinese-made shoes.
There certainly is a close relationship, almost a symbiotic relationship between the United States and China.
Thank you very much.
America has a penchant for consumption. And it works very well for hard-pressed American consumers to be able to stretch their dollars by buying low-cost, relatively high-quality goods from China.
The savings are enormous. According to a Morgan Stanley study, over the last decade, American consumers have saved $600 billion buying products that cost less because they were made in China. American-owned companies are benefiting too. Check the label. Many of the products made in China are made for companies with very familiar names, Mattel, GE, and others, including Disney, the parent company of ABC News, made by China's less expensive and infinitely expanding workforce. But China is very sensitive to the accusation that it is taking jobs away from American workers.
If U.S. thinks that we are stealing or taking away from the jobs from the United States, that's a very dangerous idea. That means the U.S. will stop making progress.
I don't think Americans are afraid that you're stealing jobs. I think they are afraid they are losing jobs.
You should make a much higher tier of products. You are able to do it. So you always, in the chain of a production, you always give up those lower end of production to those people who are producing more comparatively cheaper.
The jobs that they are creating are low-price jobs. That's not the kind of job we want for our citizens. We want high-paying jobs for our citizens.
But what about for people in the country that had jobs in factories? Is it a completely different reality for them?
No, it's not. Here's the issue. You can't keep the tides from coming in. We will never again keep the ability to, for example, make 100,000 T-shirts in this country. I'm sure there's a T-shirt manufacturer that's going to write your program and complain. But fundamentally, something like that is going to be done outside of America by people who are willing to work for a lot less.
In fact, even a few Chinese companies are now sending jobs to other countries where labor costs are lower. Chinese leaders know that their legitimacy and authority to govern 1.3 billion people depends on sustaining the economic miracle that is transforming China. And that depends, as much as anything, on a successful relationship with an economically successful United States.
We want to see the U.S. economy recover, and also we want to see other countries who are in economic difficulties recover, because if they do not recover, it is an important challenge for Chinese economy. So therefore, whatever help we can, I think we are willing to do that.
One thing the Chinese are doing is helping to pay for the American way of life. America is addicted to spending borrowed money. Increasingly, that money is borrowed from China.
The United States is buying Chinese goods. We are thus sending money to China. But the Chinese are using their savings largely to buy U.S. Treasury bills. In other words, to finance our borrowing, to finance our debt. We have a lot of debt. We need to sell about $2 billion a day of IOUs to keep consuming the way we're doing. Not a lot of people can do that outside of the Chinese.
It has become a cycle of mutual dependence. Over the last 12 months, China has bought more U.S. government securities than almost any other country. In total, China is now financing close to $1 trillion of U.S. debt.
Why is China investing so much money in the United States?
I'm not sure if it is a bad thing. I think that the certain amount of money that China has in the U.S. is in a way help the U.S. economy. And I hope that the U.S. side do appreciate that.
American businesses are attracting billions in Chinese money as well, all of which makes some Americans very uneasy.
Does that amount of money invested by China in the United States, does that make the United States vulnerable?
Yes. We're vulnerable to China, and China's vulnerable to the United States. Or another way of saying it, a better way of saying it, I think, is we're both interdependent. We're dependent on their money to finance our national debt, but on the other hand, they're dependent on the U.S. economy, a thriving U.S. economy, to provide the demand for the goods that are being manufactured in China, which is why Chinese are not going to do anything precipitous to hurt the United States.
Interdependence also means that as prosperity spreads in China, hundreds of millions of consumers there are buying more and more products and services from the United States. In fact, U.S. exports to China have nearly tripled in just the last 5 years.
For Americans, it should be clear what the benefits are of a globalized economy. Look around. It's the world you've been living in for the last 20 years. You can't stop China's rise. All you can do is make sure that the United States is positioned to take advantage of that rise. Those are our options. We can either ride this wave or we can drown in it.
After centuries of virtual isolation, this is the moment when the Chinese want the world to discover that this once great civilization is again at the center of the world.
The closing ceremonies of the Olympics will take place here in Beijing on August 24th. Then the world will have to reckon with the new China. I'm Bob Woodruff. Thank you for joining us. Good night.